I stand for open questioning of authorities. I stand for honesty, fact-based reasoning, and debate. I oppose all censorship, including hate speech laws. I reject name-calling and insults. I'm Bill Warner. We've had an election here in Nashville, Tennessee, and have established a first. A Muslim woman from Nigeria was elected to the city council, and by a very wide margin. Who voted for her? Well, Christians, Jews, progressives, leftists, elites. It was a multicultural triumph. But there were some things that didn't happen. Wisdom can see what is not, and what you see with wisdom is that there were key issues about Islam and a candidate that should be discussed. Things like Sharia, for instance. Things that are part of Islamic doctrine. I say that we should ask all Muslim candidates how much they follow the doctrine of Islam. Seems reasonable. A valid question to discuss is Christian persecution. Christians are brutally persecuted in Nigeria by Muslims, but can we talk? Well, the answer to that seems to be no, we can't talk about Christian persecution. In Nashville, Tennessee, Christians are nice and kind, but they're also timid and fearful. They don't want to rock the boat, and they won't ask tough questions. Christians now make great neighbors and great friends, but weak citizens because they won't discuss things in public that should be discussed, like Christian persecution. Now, mind you, I'm only talking about 95% of them. Why should we discuss slavery? Well, because there's such massive ignorance of slavery. The theory that we're taught in school is that evil white men on wooden ships went to Africa, took slaves from Africa, came back and sold them in America, and made massive amounts of money. Well, there's truth to this. But what is not known is that Muslims captured and sold the slaves. Where does the Muslim stand on the subject of slavery? Will they admit that there's a problem and condemn it? A real problem is that Muhammad owned and sold slaves. Black slaves, white slaves, Jewish slaves, and Arab slaves. This taking of slaves killed 120 million Africans. There were roughly 25 million people taken out of Africa as slaves, but for every one delivered to the retail market, roughly 5 died. That is, jihad is the process of capturing the slaves, and those who aren't killed and taken off as slaves leave behind those who are weak, old, and sick. So we have over 120 million killed in over a 1,400-year period. But why do we need to talk about this? It's all in the past, right? Go to the web. Use your search engine and say slavery in Africa today. You'll find that there are millions of slaves in Africa today, and I say we need to talk about this. There was a talk given here at Vanderbilt University about a slave who had been freed in Africa, so I went to hear the talk. What was puzzling is how few people wanted to hear his talk. People don't want to know about slavery. Then there's the matter of Sharia. Where does a Muslim candidate stand on Sharia? Take, for instance, wife beating. Wife beating is found in the Quran, the Sirah, and the Hadith. It's part of Sharia. Will a Muslim candidate condemn and abjure this doctrine? I would like to hear them do that. But we need to talk about it before we can do it, because these questions which I want to ask, you're called a racist or a bigot or a hater if you do it. We've created protected minorities that cannot even be criticized or even questioned. For instance, Ilhan Omar says we should not ask appalling questions. She's a congresswoman from Minnesota. But Congresswoman Omar, what if the doctrine is appalling? Well, then the questions will be appalling. But no, we're not supposed to talk about this at all. Now, she's not the only one who says that we should not discuss difficult issues which offend my protected minorities. I say bring it on. Any question is fair game for a candidate, including difficult questions. You know, we're taught in school that we have a Judeo-Christian civilization, but I find today very few Christians or Jews will defend it with simple questions. Freedom of speech is being lost because we're timid and fearful. We need no-holds-barred debate, which certainly beats the current thing of just hurling insults at people. We've got to do more than insult. We need to talk about difficult situations. Islam is not unique. There are many questions we may not ask as voters. Race, Islam, illegal immigration, and of course the problem with protected minorities is we can't talk about them. They are off in their safe space. But we need to talk about difficult situations. We need to talk about difficult questions. Because if we cannot talk about difficult questions, we will be ignorant. And an ignorant voter is a terrible voter. So let's ask difficult questions and produce enlightened voters.